Welcome, advanced human anatomy and physiology students. In our last lecture, we looked at, continue with muscle contraction. We looked at oxygen debt, oxygen supply, and cellular respiration, muscle fatigue, and heat production. Now in section 9.4, we're going to look at muscular responses, looking at what a motor unit is, sustained contractions, types of contractions, also examining the threshold stimulus there that you get with a contraction. So we're looking at muscular responses and what would cause those muscular responses. This is a little bit of a short section, but with a lot of information there regarding what happens with muscles, the interaction between the muscular and nervous system. So we know ultimately that a muscle contraction can be observed by removing a single skeletal muscle fiber and connecting it to a device that senses and records changes in the overall length of that muscle fiber. If you were to take an animal and physiology course down the road, you might do this with a frog leg. Send an electrical impulse down to the frog's leg and watch it twitch. And so when we look at that, we talk about the threshold stimulus. Basically what we see with a threshold stimulus, it's the minimal strength required to cause a contraction. And basically when we look at the skeletal muscle, a skeletal muscle fiber's resting membrane potential must be depolarized, and so we're going to depolarize that skeletal muscle membrane from negative 100 millivolts to negative 70 millivolts, and before an impulse begins. Therefore, the threshold stimulus itself is about a positive 30 millivolts that will come in there. And ultimately what will happen then is you are going to record muscle contraction. So what we see is a myogram is a recording of that muscle contraction. So you can see an example of one here on the slide. And basically a myogram records that muscle contraction, and what we get is a twitch. And a twitch itself is a single contraction that lasts a fraction of a second, and it's followed by relaxation. So when you look at a twitch in itself, there are three components. You have the latent period, the period of contraction, and the period of relaxation. So what you see is delay between the stimulus itself and the contraction that is going to occur is the latent period. And then what will happen is the force of the muscle fiber can generate depends. The force the muscle fiber can generate will actually depend on the length to which it is stretched when stimulated. A muscle fiber itself must then return to its resting state, which would be around negative 100 millivolts, before it can be stimulated again. In order to do that, this is called the refractory period. So you do have that here. So of that part of the twitch, here's the latent period, which is the stage or the delay between the stimulus and the contraction itself. The period of contraction is this increase in the slope, so you get the force of the contraction there, and then upon the maximum response to that contraction, then you go back to a period of relaxation. Ultimately, it's an all or none response. And what does that mean? So if a muscle fiber is brought to a threshold or above, it responds with a complete twitch. But if the stimulus is sub-threshold values, so below what is required for that threshold, the muscle fiber will respond, but will not respond to the stimulus there. So here you can see the length-tension relationship. If you look at the skeletal muscle fibers and the actin-myosin filaments, there you see the force, the muscle fiber length on the x-axis. So here you see that in part B of the curve, or the lightly yellow shaded area, that area is overly shortened. Then in A, you have the optimal length, and then when you go back to the relaxation or look at the length of the tension there, you have it overly stretched. So what we kind of see here is this thing. When you talk about that all or none response, you get that staircase effect, or the TREP, TREPPE. Most muscle fiber contraction is all or none. However, a muscle fiber that has been inactive can be subjected to a series of stimuli, and therefore that would cause three things to occur. The fiber undergoes a series of twitches with relaxation in between. The strength of each successive contraction increases slightly, as if you're going up the steps. And ultimately, the phenomena itself is a small and brief, and involves excess calcium ions being put into the sarcoplasm, and you also generate some muscle warming there, so you get some muscle heat. Summation then is the process by which individual twitches combine, produce sustained contractions that can lead to tetanic contractions. So when several stimuli are delivered in succession to a muscle fiber, it cannot completely relax between those contractions. The individual twitches begin to combine, and the muscle contraction becomes sustained. So in a sustained muscle contraction, the force of the individual twitches combines in a process that we call summation. So you're adding those all together. When the resulting sustained contraction lacks even a slight relaxation period, it is called a tetanic contraction. So there you have a little bit about summation there. So now we're going to look at how to recruit those motor neurons for muscular responses. So when you look at the recruitment of motor neurons, you have that single motor neuron itself, a motor neuron of one motor unit. All muscle fibers are controlled by motor neurons. A few has 4 fibers, and then as many as 1,000 or more muscle fibers can be controlled by a motor neuron. So talking a little bit about that recruitment. Remember that a motor neuron is a motor neuron plus the many skeletal fibers that is going to be stimulated by that motor neuron. The motor neuron branches into several motor nerve endings, and it can stimulate many skeletal muscles. The skeletal muscle fibers are all stimulated at the same time by just one motor neuron unit, depending on what that motor neuron unit is connected to. And ultimately then what that will lead to is to cause a contraction that is going to be simultaneous. The number of the muscle fibers in that motor unit is going to vary from 10 hundredths or more. So you could, we looked at that right there on the slide. Because a whole muscle is composed of many motor units controlled by many different motor neurons, simultaneous contraction of all units does not necessarily occur. But what we do see is that as the intensity of stimulation increases, the recruitment of motor units increases, and the unit all will contract then simultaneously. And then that will lead us into the thing called that recruitment stage. So the recruitment increases the number of motor units activated. The whole muscle is composed of many motor units that are more precise. Movements are produced with fewer muscle fibers within that motor unit, and the intensity of that stimulation would increase, and you get the recruitment of motor units, and continues until all those motor units at once are activated. And then what would ultimately result is a sustained contraction. Small motor units Smaller diameter axons are recruited first, and then larger motor units, or the larger diameter axons, are going to be recruited later. This is going to produce smooth movements. So ultimately then, sustained contractions will take place even when a muscle is at rest. A certain amount of sustained contraction is occurring in its fibers. This ultimately will lead to a thing called muscle tone. And muscle tone is very important in maintaining posture. So when we look at muscle tone is going to be that continuous state of partial contraction that we use for maintaining posture. Ultimately then, these are the types of contractions. You can have an isotonic contraction, and basically an isotonic contraction, the muscle shortens at its attachments, and it's going to cause movement. So muscle contracts and changes the length. There are two basic types of isotonic contractions. You have the concentric contraction or an eccentric contraction. In a concentric contraction, you have shortening contractions, and an eccentric is the lengthening contraction there. The other type would be an isometric. You've heard of isometric exercises. And what's going on there in an isometric contraction, the muscle becomes taut, and basically the attachments do not move. So you're tensing a muscle. So basically you're contracting that muscle, but you do not change its length, the length of that muscle. Most muscular movements involve a combination of both isotonic and isometric contractions. And there you can see in the diagram what that is there. So examples of both isotonic and isometric. And then you have what would lead into a fast twitch, a slow twitch of the muscle fibers. So muscle fibers vary in contraction speed. Some are slow and some are fast. So ultimately what do we see? In a slow twitch, muscle fibers are called red fibers. So the slow twitch fibers are the red fibers of the muscle tissue. Basically, they contain oxygen carrying pigment, and that pigment, of course, would be myoglobin. And myoglobin is going to receive a rich blood supply, and myoglobin will carry that good oxygen supply, and therefore you're going to have a lot of cellular respiration occur here, so you need many mitochondria. And because there are many mitochondria and cellular respiration are happening, you can generate ATP fast enough to keep up with the breakdown, and ultimately these fibers contract for long periods of time without fatiguing. The other type are the fast twitch fibers. The fast twitch fibers, they contain less myoglobin, so we call them the white fibers. And because they contain less myoglobin, blood, and fewer mitochondria, they're going to have a greater extensive sarcoplasmic reticulum that is able to store and reabsorb calcium ions. And basically these fibers are going to contract rapidly. However, because of their rapid contraction, they will also fatigue easily. And ultimately, that would lead up to lactic acid buildup in the blood and the tissue itself. So the fast twitch glycolytic fibers, white fibers with less myoglobin, poorer blood supply, fewer mitochondria, you have more of that sarcoplasmic reticulum, and it's susceptible to fatigue there. That would be the type 2A. And then you have fast twitch fatigue resistant fibers, type 2B. These are going to be intermediate fibers. Those are oxidative. They have intermediate amounts of myoglobin and appear pink to red in color. They are a little bit more resistant to fatigue itself. So that's it. Our next venture is going to be into smooth muscle, and then we'll go into cardiac muscle, and basically that will bring us to the end of the muscular system, and we will continue to look at the muscles of the human body in lab. So thank you everyone, and have a great day.